it kind of, I'm kind of on, and I'm kind of not, and people are already used to seeing me say, "Are we on yet?" I believe we're on. All right, we're joined this hour by Tim Hatch, who is a professor, a poet, um, um, a community organizer, organizing poetry in the poetry community. Um, really incredible guy. Tim, can you take it away with a poem?
Yeah. So this is a poem called Concerto, written 6 years ago now, something like that. So Concerto in three parts. One, my father's mouth, a broken record, stuck on the same sadistic song. Teeth jaundiced from decades of coffee and cigarettes, towers over me a cankerous storm cloud. Saliva stretches, then shrinks at the sides. Sickly stage curtains swish open and shut for a performance that never really begins or ends. Deep, sharp pain in my chest pulls my eyes up to his lunatic glare, right hand raised, index finger extended. 2. Like a conductor's baton, he brings it down. Stupid. His finger stabs my chest so hard I wonder if he's drawn blood. Fucking. Another stab digs in me up to the first knuckle. Loser. I've never hurt like this. He keeps laying into me, each downbeat the perfect, demeaning accent to a dehumanizing verbal spike. My throat feels tight, like I'm swallowing cotton, as he drums an endless staccato of hate speech. Worthless, goddamn moron. His finger comes in wrong and breaks, immediately purpling to twice its size. Cradling one hand with the other, he comes in close, searches my face, dares me, begs me to appreciate the irony before he leaves in search of an ice pack. 3. In the bathroom, I stand shirtless under the humiliating glare of the fluorescent, and I count 37 fingertip reminders that I'm stupid and worthless. I take the blade out of my father's safety razor and lightly drag it across my chest, slicing staff lines from my father's notes. I stand back and look at myself. Bloody sheet music for a bastard's concerto.
Wow,
Wow.
that's a
That's
that's a
a, that's a
that's a rough go. Um, so thank you for joining us, Tim. I'm really excited to have you here. Got a little echo, so I'm going to mute you while I'm talking, then I'll mute myself when you're talking. I'm really excited to have you join us, Tim. Me and Tim first met at the San Gabriel, an event put on by the San Gabriel Lit Fest. I think at that time it was still called Writers Weekend. Now it's called Shorama. I saw him do some performances there, a workshop. I also seen him later at some other events put on by John Branningham in connection with the Dawes Center for the Arts, where John and I both have connections to. So one, I've seen Tim. I've seen Tim around, and he's always impressed me. He's always an incredible poet, incredible talent, really giving spirit. So Tim, can you talk a little bit about your involvement with the San Gabriel Lit Fest?
Yeah, so, gosh, I think I've only actually been involved in any official capacity for 6 months. But I've been going to the readings at the DAW or wherever they are for years. I met John and I want to say John Branningham in 2014. It must have been 2014. Michelson Knapp, another excellent local poet. He and I were in undergrad together at Cal State San Bernardino, and he introduced me to John and Lloyd and all the people involved with Writers Weekend, which is what it was at the time. And so for the last 6 months, I've been on the board with the Lit Fest. All I've really been able to participate in to date is the big reading that we do every year, which happened 6 to 8 weeks ago. and that was amazing. That was a fantastic event. And then the monthly readings have all kind of been put on hold due to this coronavirus nonsense. Although, you know, this is the right thing to do. Even poetry isn't worth dying for. So yeah, that's kind of. I've been with San Gabriel Lit Fest for 6 months, and so far I'm loving every bit of it. I guess I did host one of the smaller readings at the DAW last year. I think that was a little bit before I was brought on. John was out of town, and no one else could take.
Yeah, that was one of the key.
Yeah.
So okay, so can you tell us a little bit how you you wrote about obviously a very painful experience in your youth. Can you tell us about how you came to poetry and in coming into poetry, how that helped you? How that is, what poetry's meant in your life? One second.
Without going into the boring backstory, I dropped out of college when my camera will shift out of focus. The light in this room's terrible. I apologize. I dropped out of college sometime in my 20s and didn't know what the hell I wanted to do, and found myself back in college pursuing an English degree with a specific goal of becoming a better writer, because that's the only thing I've ever really loved doing is writing. And so in my 40s, I went back to my undergrad, finished my undergrad and at Cal State San Bernardino, and I got into poetry 100% by accident. All the poetry I had read, honestly, 99% of the poetry I had read up to that point was, I don't want to diss Wordsworth, but it was that kind of thing. What I used to make fun of, like guys in poofy shirts talking about trees and shit, which I hope it's okay to swear. But yeah, I don't care about, I love trees. Trees are great, but there's only so much you can read, and I don't care about that stuff a whole lot. It doesn't affect me emotionally at all. And another local poet named Michael Cooper, affectionately known by a lot of us as Mouse, kind of dragged me to a poetry reading at CSUSB one night, and I was blown away. I saw all these people reading their poetry, and some of it was great and some of it needed work, but it was such an amazing community at that point in time, so supportive and positive. It was a really positive experience. And I was hearing what I was hearing was contemporary confessional poetry, and I didn't know you could just talk about you. I really didn't. And then I took 2 poetry classes at CSUSB. My goal was to become a fiction writer, and I took the 2 poetry classes, honestly, to kind of get it over with, because I was like, okay, I don't know anything about this. It's going to hurt. And 10-week quarters, and maybe by week 4, poetry had its hooks deep into me. And I figured out that if I could even get okay at writing a decent poem, it would make my fiction that much better. To learn how to use an economy of words and to have a strong visual, that's kind of all important in my opinion. So that's how I landed into poetry.
Yeah. So what would you say? I'm listening to you talk about some of when you first saw poetry that you actually enjoyed, right? So what for you? I wouldn't ask you to define poetry, because that's always the ridiculous question that people always ask poets. But what I would ask you is, I want you to define, if you can, the poetry you enjoy.
Yeah. I am so forgetting the last name right now of the poet who the featured reader at that poetry reading, Judy. It's not coming to me. It'll come to me, or it won't, and I'll have to tell you later. But anyway, she's a really great local poet, and she read a poem that she wrote about her being with her husband, who this is a long time ago, but may have been ill. This is 8 years ago now. I believe her husband was ill. She wrote this very vulnerable poem about her husband, who was in a very vulnerable state. and she herself was in a very raw, fragile, emotional state, very vulnerable as well. And I just was overwhelmed by the artistic expression of that vulnerability. It really spoke to me, and I think, um, I mean, the poem I started off with is about my own child abuse, and I've lived through some ugly shit, and I think we all kind of have to one degree or another, and I think we're all kind of bound by trauma, and that really spoke to me. It really meant something beautiful, and kind of where I landed after thinking about this for several years is basically poetry. For my money, poetry is the same as cave paintings, right? From however many thousand years ago, some dude in a cave draws some buffalo, some dudes with spears. He's just relating what he's been through. Like, this is what I saw, this is what I did, this is what I've been through, this is what makes me me. And I find poetry to basically be that. I find poetry to be that primal. The poetry that really speaks to me is usually that primal, that vulnerable. Vulnerability, beautifully expressed, is a powerful thing. It's so strong. It's compelling.
I had a poet on earlier, and I asked her something. I'm gonna ask you the same thing. I asked her, like, what? How do you know when a poem's done? Like, what? It wasn't like, how do you know a poem's done in general? I don't mean this in like this kind of poetry kind of way. I mean this in a very specific. When you write a poem, how do you like to end it? How do you like to stick the landing? I'm really curious about the more I have poets on it, the more thing I'm gonna ask them about craft. How do you decide to end your poems?
Man, I'm really verbose, and I'm going to do my best not to talk forever. But I had this natural instinct when I started writing poetry that every poem had to kind of end with the mic drop. And when every poem ends with a mic drop, it gets really tedious fast, I think. And that was pointed out to me by several friends in the writers group I was in with Michelson and Lloyd. Michelle, Monica, Jeffrey. I did too much of the mic drop crap, and these days, I guess it starts by just saying what I have to say, and then I try to actually I now second guess every time I think that I'm dropping the mic. I will immediately do my best to get rid of those lines, those last couple lines. I really will do my best to end a poem before the tension is dispelled, if that makes any sense. Bloody sheet music for a Bastard's Concerto, I've just been bruised, and then I've drawn lines on my chest with a razor in the poem, and then I don't know, that could easily go on another 3 pages about how shitty I felt and what father does this and all these questions that you have. But I really felt that going on any further than that would frankly get boring and tedious. And there's kind of a point where your poetry can very easily turn into sort of a public display of therapy. And I'm all for the therapy that you can get from writing, but I don't think that's the point. The point is to connect with other people. And the minute it becomes too much of an open book, or I'm getting into details that only I think I would care about, then I feel like I don't know, that feels like desperation to me. That feels like, look at me. And anyway, I hope that makes sense. I'm showing you my open wound. Or if I am, I don't want to go into how I feel about the open wound. I don't know that you need to give everything about all of that. So I guess the short answer is I want to maintain the tension I want to end before that tension gets dissipated.
Yeah. So what I noticed is, and I guess I asked you the same question because I have the same. I noticed the same thing with this other poet, Jaha, who comes from a completely different background. She was actually in the coming out of a lot of the the writer workshops out of Lamert, which are extremely rigorous. I mean, extremely people just like hammering you. I mean, it's a pretty. I've been to a couple of them. The Nazi writer workshop. They're pretty tough. But I noticed this very similar trait that you and she have, which is that you end without resolution. There's no resolution to the problem. The problem's still there. And I am one of the biggest people that ends with this thing you're calling the mic drop, right? I'm always doing that. But I mean, the trick for me is for a mic drop to have like a lot of foreshadowing, and it has this foreshadowing. So when the mic does drop, it harkens back to something that happened earlier, and the mic has dropped, but the mic was shown to be weak in the beginning, and then all of a sudden at the end it's strong. So therefore it fulfills some literary trick, right? And that's why the mic drop works so well. I think it works well. I mean, I don't give a shit what other people think. So I so I like doing it, but I also really like this like lack of resolution when I hear it. When I hear a lack of resolution done really well, I really like it. And I heard that in her poetry, and I'm hearing that in your poetry. So I'm kind of like, I'm always interested in learning about how people go about their craft. So I really do appreciate that the ability of maintaining attention and like leaving the thing unresolved. Like it like fades into mist. I really love that. Yeah, that's not really a question. I'm just telling you, I really love it. But yeah. So for you, I want to know like, what are some tips you have for those who want to write poetry with and maintain attention? What are some of the ways to go about that?
Well, man, I mean, I think the biggest tip. I'm teaching a poetry class at CSUSB right now, and the biggest tip I give anyone who's starting out writing poetry is just give yourself permission to write a crappy poem. You know, Wordsworth didn't come out of the womb Wordsworth. He spent a long time becoming that dude. Any of the poets we consider the be all end all. One of my current absolute favorites is Ocean Vuong, and that guy, he wasn't born with all that ability. So allow yourself to write a crappy poem and then revise and revise and revise and revise. But in terms of like keeping that tension there, man, I really don't know if I ever would have recognized it in myself. I mean, fortunately, I had a couple things going on at the same time. I was in all the workshop classes at CSUSB, and I had a couple of fantastic teachers who were not afraid to give me constructive criticism, sometimes even never mean, but sometimes a little on the harsh side. One of the best pieces of constructive criticism I ever got from one of my professors was just the words "no shit," and I won't go into the boring details, but I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Anyway, but also having the friends writing group that I had and having them point it out to me that I was doing that mic drop all the time, I'm not sure I would have been self-aware enough without those two sources in my life catching things like that. I mean, not all of us are lucky enough and privileged enough to be able to go to a writing program of any kind. But everyone can get together with friends who have similar interests and start something like that up. And I'll be honest with you, I got some of the best criticism in those years from the writing group of my friends. They loved me, but they didn't care about stepping on my toes or hurting my feelings. And it was understood by all of us that we are not our writing. And so if someone's trashing your writing, they're not trashing you. And but frankly, there's a lot of writing that needed to be trashed in my earlier. I mean, there's a lot that still needs to be pointed out to me and corrected with every new poem I write. So having a critique group of people you trust and who will it matters if it's a safe space. That term gets a lot of shit from people these days, but the safe space part of that matters. You know they're going to take care of you, but they're also going to give you the criticism that your writing needs, which, yeah, that would be off the top of my head, that would probably be one of the things for someone who really wants to get better at writing anything. A writing group, a critique group, man, that it's worth its weight in gold, in my opinion.
So you heard it here first from Professor Tim Hatch that you are not your writing. He's dropping jewels, just gems of wisdom from his home sauna. He's just really he's just really
It does look like a song.
It does. And you keep fogging up too. So let's transition now. So you are a professor, you are a teacher, you teach poetry classes. What was that like? How did you go from being somebody just sharing their poetry and just being some lone artist in the world to now being a professor?
Well, I finished my undergrad. I got my MFA, Masters in Fine Arts, in creative writing, focusing on poetry at Cal State San Bernardino, which was a fantastic program. It breaks my heart to use that in the past tense. That program has been on hiatus. We were the last group to graduate from that program. I hope it comes back, but bureaucracy being what it is, I don't know when or if that's going to happen. I really hope it comes back, though. Anyway, I got my MFA, and my idea was I really just wanted to write. And it really, if I had financial security and I never had to work, I would not work. I would just be locked up here in this office, writing as much as I could and ignoring the world, and which is not a healthy thing to do, but that's what I'd be doing. But I had to pay the bills. Really had to pay the bills. I had some poor ass years as a student there, and you get a master's in creative writing, and you can teach English composition at a community college, and you can teach English composition for a 4-year school, for that matter, and an MFA, it turns out, is a terminal degree like a PhD. Anyway, I graduated, and that was spring 2016. The following fall, I was teaching at a local community college, and a year after that, I was teaching at 2 community colleges and CSUSB. And the CSUSB thing was just honestly, it was a fluke. I was leaving. I was working there anyway in a non-teaching job, and my current boss at the time was on a cigarette break with my future boss to be, and he had to replace someone who went out on medical leave, and I just happened to be the right place in the right time. He needed a writing instructor, and sure enough, I can teach composition, so that worked out. I literally got that job. I mean, I was interviewed over the phone. I got the job. It was a very good bit of timing. And anyway, and let's be honest, I'm sure the white privilege didn't hurt the situation because I don't have a PhD, and most people teaching at the 4-year level do. In any case, I got the job that I'm doing now, teaching poetry. Literally, I was a year ago at a graduation party and ran into the current English chair at CSUSB. And I just said, hey, man, if you're looking for someone to be an adjunct, I've already got my own office. And he said, I'll keep that in mind. And so I've taught a couple composition classes, and I'm teaching my first poetry course this spring. Teaching it on Zoom, which is an interesting experience, but anyway, and I've been teaching at RCC for the last 3-4 years, and it's all kind of worked out really well. The poetry part, the creative writing that I either teach or that I'm involved with, that's been by far the minority of what I teach. Mostly I'm teaching composition or critical thinking. Though I will say I do facilitate a critique group for Inlandia um, in Ontario. That's one of my jobs.
So we're joined by a wide variety of people. Not everyone's involved in poetry, and certainly not everyone's involved in poetry from Southern California, and certainly not everyone's involved in poetry near the Inland Empire. Can you tell our audience a little bit about Inlandia and what they do?
Nonprofit organization in the Inland Empire, but it's based out of Riverside originally. And my God, they have so much stuff. I'm going to utterly fail at listing all the things they do, but they have regular readings. They have a regular conversation series at the Culver Auditorium, which is on UCR, I believe. They have writers' workshop groups all over the place. I think there literally might be like a dozen of those now. Redlands, 2 in San Bernardino, 1 or 2 in Riverside. Ontario, which is the one I facilitate. They may have workshops out in the high desert, Palm Desert area, if I remember correctly. And they just are all about promoting the literary scene in the Inland Empire. Every year they release a journal of poetry and short fiction written by the people who attend the creative writing workshops. It's a really cool group, really cool organization. And I mean, to join up one of those groups, I mean, there has to be availability. There usually is some availability. And then I don't think you even have to pay. I think a donation is encouraged, but I don't think you have to pay. I feel like I should know, given that I run one of them, but I suck, I guess.
You're the talent. You don't need to know. You don't need to bother yourself with such questions, right? Let's see. Thank you for sharing that. So what should people know about the poetry scenes of, let's say, the Inland Empire that people might not be aware of? I think they're Inland Empire, San Diego Valley. A lot of these places get ignored for Los Angeles or even Orange County. So what should people know that they don't know about the poetry scene in the Inland Empire?
Oh man, the poetry scene in the Inland Empire, San Bernardino and Riverside counties are what I can speak to with some degree of authority. It is thriving. Poetry, creative writing, flash fiction, creative nonfiction, it is thriving. There are so many amazing, talented people. A lot of them are colleagues of mine who are teachers, but a lot of them are just, people who do whatever. There's a great local author named Alan Kalachi who works as a librarian at the I think it's the Bayan Library in Rancho Cucamonga, and there's just so many amazing, talented people who are writing so much fantastic stuff, speaking to what I think is an overlooked aspect of the Southern California experience, which is to say generational poverty, oppression, whether that oppression comes from, the systemic racism that we know exists in society, or let's just say the many failings of unregulated capitalism. We're talking about it. We're talking about the natural landscape out here. I guarantee you, if you go to a poetry reading anywhere east of the 15 freeway, you're going to hear someone talk about the wind. All right, we have stuff to say about the wind in the Inland Empire. It is loud and it blows hard, and sometimes it'll take trees down. The wind is chaos, and it's kind of an interesting metaphor for a lot of life out here. But that's obviously only one aspect of life out here. I mean, I'm leading a very privileged life here in Ontario. My wife and I are both educators. We both have advanced degrees, and I don't know. There's just such a rich diversity of people writing so many wonderful things. The Inland Empire scene is a really great, excellent, thriving scene. I think when the MFA program at San Bernardino went on hiatus, it maybe lost a little bit of its focus, maybe a little bit, but there are still poetry readings going on all the time. And there are poetry readings in Riverside all the time. I know there's stuff going on out in the desert. I was fortunate enough to read for a, it was out in Joshua Tree. The journal is called Cholla Needles, Cholla, Cholla Needles. And there's a place out there called the Space Cowboy Bookstore. And I got to read with Juan Delgado, who is a former teacher of mine and one of the best local poets we have. Anyway, just
I got a chance to check out one at the last time I saw you in public, and probably the last time I will see you publicly for a little bit. But we have a question from the audience, but you know what? I'm gonna sit on my question. We have a question from the audience here. It says, "It seems to me," this comes from Frank Mundo, who's an excellent writer. Do you know Frank?
I'm terrible with names, but I know faces really well.
All right, Frank's great.
I apologize, Frank.
Frank's great. You're great. And if you don't know each other, you should know each other. Okay, so Frank Mundo. It seems to me like poetry has become very serious, or has to be serious to be considered important. Is there room for humor in your poetry? Earlier, you spoke about vulnerability. Couldn't humor address vulnerability issue and still be considered serious or important? I am seriously about to go refill my coffee cup. I can hear you. I am not being rude. I am not leaving. But take it away with Frank.
All right. Yeah. Damn straight. There's room for humor, for sure. And you know what? I don't want to turn this into a showcase of my work, but give me one moment, please. So I wrote a poem about a friend of mine who was dying in the hospital, and it's called Helping John Piss. My friend John was in the hospital. He was dying. I wrote this poem. I'll just read this one stanza. Actually, I'm going to read two stanzas. Your hands, this is me literally helping my friend stand up so that he can take a piss in one of those hospital plastic urinals. Your hands fumble under your gown and our eyes lock into each other in silent agreement. Your head rolls back and I realize your lower jaw hasn't been jutting out this whole time. You just don't have any upper teeth. I had no idea. The echo of water hitting plastic is lost in your painful roar. A nurse tells you to keep it down, but we tell him to go fuck himself. A bottle with 1.5 inches of brown liquid appears from under your gown, and you place it next to my iced tea. So, I'll stop reading there, but every time I read that in public, this guy putting his piss next to my iced tea, and they're obviously the same color, that starts to get a laugh, and then the laugh gets really awkward and uncomfortable because this is a really not funny situation. And there's something wrong with the dude when your piss is brown. Your piss shouldn't be brown. And, I mean, I meant it to be funny. I see the humor in that. I put it in there because it made me laugh. I mean, the part that I didn't talk about in the poem is that iced tea, I'm not drinking that shit anymore. And it was perfectly fine, but I wasn't about to fucking drink it. So anyway, yeah, there's room for humor in that. There's room for humor everywhere. I think, for me anyway, humor is one of the ways I deal with so much pain and horrible shit.
Yeah. So earlier you mentioned the horrors of unregulated capitalism, especially how they play out in the Inland Empire. A lot of people don't realize that the Inland Empire is one of the major industrial zones left in the United States of America. There's still a lot of factory work out there, a lot of whatever, and it's
yeah.
I mean, it has all the dangers of factory work. It has all the demands of factory work, and it also has all the environmental rot of factory work still going out there. So can you tell us a little bit about the tell us a little bit about, just life in general in the Inland Empire that people not from the Inland Empire might not be familiar with.
I mean, life in the Inland Empire is kind of a it's a diverse experience, but I mean, it's kind of a story of blue collar workers. It's a story of warehouses. Holy crap. Ontario, I apologize. Give me 1 second. I am so sorry to do that. My wife is feeding the dogs, and one of them was trapped in here with my boring ass. And
oh my god! No, that's cruelty to animals.
He was about to start howling, and that had to be stopped. Anyway, life is a story about warehouses out here, man, and Ontario is one of the major distribution hubs on the West Coast. We're also one of the major communication hubs on the West Coast. After One Wilshire in LA, there's a whole strip of land going down Milliken Avenue from north of the 10 freeway all the way south of the 60 freeway. There's just this massive communications hub. And yeah, warehouses, factories. The Ontario airport is constantly shipping stuff out. It is a very major industrial center, and unfortunately, a lot of those jobs are deemed unskilled, I guess. Unskilled labor, which is bullshit. There's no such thing. But, yeah, so a lot of those people are working in, non-union jobs for not nearly enough pay, and there's not enough economic stability. And if it is a union job, if for one of those few warehouses it is union, then that's fantastic. And that group of people is doing well, but the people working one building over ain't. And I don't know. I think it kind of colors everything. The Inland Empire. If you look at the Inland Empire, if I close my eyes and think in my mind of what the Inland Empire is, I am seeing just endless miles of freeway and highway and railway lines, and just trains constantly, and the 860 whatever, the giant trucks, semi trucks, and the planes constantly. I live in Ontario. The airport's that way. I don't hear it, but constantly planes coming in for a landing and taking off, and it's just a constantly moving. In a way, the Inland Empire, for a landlocked patch of land, it's kind of like a port town. It's kind of like Long Beach Harbor in a way. There's just a lot going on in terms of moving stuff around.
Another thing about unregulated capitalism, or just capitalism in general, we're in a situation now where we're facing this pandemic, this crisis, and we don't have the supplies we need. We just don't have them. Like even if one governor is superior to another governor, or one group of people, one state's doing things better than another, the fact of the matter is we don't have a national supply line for the things we need, regardless of what a mayor or a governor might do. Why is it that a market system will constantly fail to address a pandemic?
My short answer to that is because a market system doesn't give a shit about people. A market system gives a shit about profit and nothing else. Unregulated capitalism cares about the bottom line. And well-regulated capitalism, a la the New Deal, that changed the world, really. The middle class was never larger than it was after World War II, after the New Deal. And we were taxing the wealthy at an incredibly higher rate than we currently are, and the middle class was huge, and everyone was kind of prospering. And but that was capitalism that was strictly bound by these rules to give a shit about people. And unregulated capitalism doesn't. It just doesn't matter. All that matters is profit. That's why we're having this crisis of personal protective equipment for healthcare workers and all that, whether it's respirators or masks or whatever. And the Trump administration's response has been to like encourage people to bid on selling this equipment to various states and various agencies. Like, who gives a shit about selling it? I mean, there are people dying. There are people dying from doing their job. Human life should trump profit. I hate that I just used Trump in that sentence. But anyway, human life should come first, right? And with a market system, I just don't think it does.
I would tend to agree. So getting back to the fact that you're a teacher, you're a professor, what do you think it is a responsibility of those who are in a position to teach poetry? What is important to pass to this next generation or next wave or next what have you of incoming poets?
I mean, so going back to the whole cave painting thing, as much as we might want to steal, like I would love to be the guy who wrote Howl, Ginsberg, right? I would love to, but that ain't me. That's not my experience, and I'm not even Michelson Knapp. I'm not John Branningham. I'm just who I am, and who I am matters, and what I have to say matters. And by the way, you're catching me on a good day because, man, I go back and forth on that shit all the time. I spend half my life thinking I'm a fraud and that I shouldn't be even trying. But that's that imposter syndrome crap that I think a lot of creative people suffer with. But what I say matters. I'm a person who matters. And I think my students, I would hope that anyone starting out, anyone young and wanting to become a poet or a songwriter or whatever pursuit, artistic pursuit, and along the lines of self-expression, I hope they understand how important they are. Like, we need more individual perspectives on what's going on in the world. That's how we learn more about who we are, and about the world we live in. You have a great poem, not to sound like a kiss ass, but you have a great poem talking shit about where we're at economically when we got a crazy billionaire, blowing his own car into space. That is some crazy shit. And I am just going to, I've heard you read that at least in 2 different places. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, even though I have no way of actually knowing this to be true, you had to have opened some eyes in both of those rooms. I mean, mostly I heard that news and was like, God damn, that's amazing. He put a car in space. That's impressive. And, later on I was like, well, maybe that was also kind of shitty. Maybe that's some money that could have been spent feeding the hungry or whatever, right? But that's kind of the point you're making with your poem. And I guarantee you there were some light bulbs going off over some heads in both of those rooms. And that's why that's so important. It's important for the Matt Cedillos to be out there saying their thing and speaking their truth, because it opens our eyes to things we haven't contemplated. I mean, in a way, it's like the critique group. It's like the writing workshop. You get the feedback that you yourself might not have thought about. And then the other thing is just, have fun. I mean, it's words. You should take joy in playing around with words and communication, and maybe that means you write some crappy poetry along the way, but have fun and play around with it too. I mean, poetry that takes itself so seriously can be such a drag sometimes, even if it's beautifully crafted.
Well, first, thank you. But secondly, you mentioned John Branningham. So again, we're dealing with a large group of people who are watching this or not watching this, and will watch later, who will come from a lot of cross sections just a lot of cross sections of society. So can you tell us a little more about John Branningham for those who don't know him?
John Branningham, I give him shit and tell him he looks like young Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. Um, yeah. And the ironic part is
He looks young. I mean,
he, although I think he kind of just did a similar haircut to me because of the whole quarantine thing, so he might have ruined that look for the time being. But John is, ironically, he's younger than I am, I think, by a year. But he's this amazing dude who figured out what he wanted to do. Unlike me, he figured out what he wanted to do at a relatively young age, and he's been pursuing it for 25 years, longer, I guess. He's been teaching at Mount Sac for, I'm just going to say 25 years. I don't truthfully know the actual number, but it's right around there. He's been writing poetry and fiction for 20 some odd years. He's been organizing Culturama, formerly Writers Weekend at Mount Sac, which is that annual event, which sadly would have been just last weekend, I think. And that's going to be changed to the fall, though, so we still get to have one in 2020. He's been organizing that for 10 years, and it's grown beautifully. That's not just John. That's John and Lloyd Aquino, and Michelle Doherty was involved with that. I don't know if she still is. And I know there are other people whose names I'm forgetting, but John's kind of got his fingers in a lot of pies. The San Gabriel Lit Fest, the California Imagism Gallery with him, with his wife, Anne. He's just a very powerful local force when it comes to the creative community, whether it's art or the written word or whatever. And then also, I would argue he is a huge advocate for young people trying to lift themselves up out of their circumstances and change their lives through education. He's an advocate for. He's an advocate. What I will say, without his permission, is he's an advocate for students. He's an advocate for people looking to improve their situation and help themselves. And he has gone so far above and beyond what the job calls for. And I'll leave it at that. But I mean, he's a cheerleader for people, for the arts and for education. And he's a John Branningham is I would say maybe a uncommonly good man, and thank God we have a John Branningham out here.
I would agree. John Branningham is a very, very powerful man. I would not don't fuck with Branningham. He's like many fiefdoms. But
without the narcissism though.
Yeah, without that, I'm gonna interview John. I think on Sunday or Saturday. So I'm just fucking around.
Right on.
But John is but getting away from John. This isn't about John. That John has his own interview. This is yours. All right. Yeah. So let's talk about the Hatch business. You have some books. Let's hear about it.
Okay. Yeah. So I am still. Well, let me just start by saying this. I am finishing up revision on my collection of poetry, which is, I've started off as my master's thesis, and I've been working on that. I took a long break away from that. I had my little brother committed suicide 3.5 years ago, and that put just a big old halt to everything for a couple of years. And but anyway, I'm finishing revision on that. I am going to start looking for some small press publishers locally to publish that thing. If any of them happen to see this, let's talk. But also, this is getting a little bit away from poetry, but last July 17th, 40 weeks ago yesterday, I had weight loss surgery because my health was, frankly, I was in a kind of a slow roll into the grave, into an early grave, and I had diabetes and all these complications from being too damn heavy, and that was 40 weeks and 220 pounds ago, roughly. And I've lost a lot of weight. My diabetes is in remission, and I'm going somewhere with this. I just walking and not running into walls. My center of gravity has changed. My balance. It's like I'm going through puberty again. I run into walls. I trip over shit. Uh, it's ridiculous. And so I'm chronicling what this whole process has been in a series of ebooks called My Bariatric Year, which is published by Pelicanesis Publishing, which is a local small press run by Mark Gibbons, who is another amazing individual. Thank God we have a Mark Gibbons in this area. And 2 volumes of that are currently out, and it's ebooks, so they're cheap. I mean, I think they're $2.95, and you can get those anywhere that you get ebooks, whether it's Apple or Amazon or whatever. Maybe buy from someone who isn't Apple or Amazon. Anyway, but no, fuck that. Buy them anywhere. I don't care. But they're short installments, and I think it's going to wind up totaling out at 6. The second one is out. It's been out for about a month, and the third one is forthcoming. I am working on that now. So that's what's going on with me publishing wise.
Yeah. Well, we'll drop links below. People can follow and click on them. I thank you so much, Tim, for joining us from your home sauna. Again, I would warn you, I would caution about putting your degrees in a sauna. I don't think that's the best place for them. But no, I really appreciate you taking your time and joining us for this hour. And all the best. And I hope to see you soon, but not sooner than we should.
Thank you, Matt. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate the invite. Anytime. And I look forward to seeing you in public when that's, doable without fear of dying of a horrific disease.
See you then.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Yeah.